So I've already opened my wine glass scene that I created in the previous tutorial, but I'm going to go ahead and, if you don't have it open, open it up or open up a similar file. Again, right, this little seamless backdrop is just a very simple object with a subdivision surface on it. And so it's really not super hard to make. And yeah. You can go ahead and make those things pretty quickly. But what I want to do is I've got these two cups, and I may go ahead and apply the glass material I've already got onto this other cup as well before I get any further. I never ended up doing that, so I'm going to go ahead and apply that there so we at least have glass on both of these objects. Okay. So now what I need to do is I need to merge this file, and we've talked about this a little bit already. Sorry, I'm trying to close everything here. There's a couple ways I can do this. I can either come over here and I can go up to File with this one selected, and I can say File and go down to Merge Project, and then I can say what project I want to bring in. In this case, because I just have a candle, I have one object, I'm not going to worry about moving a huge hierarchy. I'm just going to copy it from this file. I'm going to paste it into my wine scene demo. All right, and so this shows up here at the beginning, right in the 0 position. I'm going to go ahead and move this just a little bit, so it's kind of, oops. I don't know what I just moved. I'm going to make sure I have the cylinder selected. So I've been trying to move. This. And you'll see that I'm getting some really weird results. My candle's wiggling and jiggling. And that's because, for whatever reason, enable axis is on. I don't know if I turned it on at the end of the last demo and saved it and it kept that state. I don't know, but it was on. So again, always check that. It's never, it's always annoying. And so I'm going to go ahead and not move this in 3 dimensions, but move it in 2 and bring it a little bit forward. And I'm probably going to move my camera position too, just a touch, because it's not really going to be super helpful where it is. And what I'm trying to do is just get this set so that I can, so it can illuminate the wine glasses a little bit eventually, and everything can be set. Okay, so now what I need to do is I'm going to need to add a light to the scene. And I do want you to note, I'm going to zoom way out a little bit, the field and the displacer are starting to get a little bit obnoxious, right? We don't really need to see that information anymore, right? It's there, we're happy that we have these things available, but I don't really want to see them in my viewport. And so under the filter tab, which we really haven't talked about in it's in any panes that you have open here, I can go down and I can come down to deformer and uncheck that. And I can go down to filter again and I can go to field and uncheck that. And what that does is it means these are still here, they're still active. I just don't have to look at all those lines in my scene, which is kind of obnoxious. Okay, so I've got my cylinder candle ready to go. And what I want to do is I want to put a point light basically right there. So I'm going to go ahead and create a point light. And I am kind of wish that I hadn't moved my cylinder, but I'm just going to go ahead and go to my coordinates. I'm going to, for my cylinder object, I'm going to click on one of these P's and I'm going to right click and just say copy. I'm going to go to my point light on the coordinates tab. Great. I'm going to click over here. I'm going to hit paste. All right. And so now it's at least put it centered in this model. So now I can just scoot the light up and you can see I want it to be basically right above the tip of that point that I have in the center of my candle. So if I go ahead, if I don't move my light again, if I go ahead and render this, and I'm going to switch to my Redshift render view tab, and I'll go ahead and start rendering this. We'll see, let's see here, the shaders have to compile first. Okay, so you can see, right, I can't see this light at all. You can kind of see a little bit of illumination here, but I do have these other lights on in the scene. So what I want to do is I want to shut the other lights off. So I have, let's see here, this light, and I already have the softbox off. Great. So I just have this one light, and now everything is very, very dark. It's starting to render, but right, you can see, even though it says there's light here, I'm definitely going to need some more intensity on this light, or else I'm not going to get anything. So we are going to go ahead and go to our object tab over here, and I know this is like the worst possible view, but I'm just going to go ahead and boost my intensity a lot. And you can see it's starting to show up. I might want to boost it a bit more, right? Because it's a, it's a reasonably bright candle. We're not going to worry about too much here, and I might boost my intensity here. Okay, so this scene is pretty dark. If I was to lift this light up some, right, we're going to get a lot more light in the scene, and that's because it's going to be actually peeking over the edges of this of the candle. And in our case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull it back down a little bit more. So you can see, like, here we go. Let's just go a little bit. And you can see on the edge of the, candle, right, that where it's kind of dipping down here below that edge a little bit. So we're going to leave this set there, right? So it's really dark in our scene as it stands. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the render for a second, just so that while I do these next steps, it doesn't crash on me. This is a great time to save our scene as, I might call it wine glass scene candle or something like that. So we know that it's got this other part in there. And what we're going to do is we are going to start looking at materials for this. So I'm going to pull this over. I'm actually just going to go to the standard mode for a bit so we have a bigger view. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new material, just a default material. I'm going to go ahead and, oh, that looks gorgeous. I'm going to go ahead and apply this to my candle. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to double click and open up the node editor. And I don't have to do anything node related. There's some interesting artifacts happening here, which makes me want to just save my project out of habit because maybe something's going to crash soon. Or it may just update once I refresh things a bit. Okay. So what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is we're going to be focused on SubSurface. And there's a bunch of other settings here as well. But we don't need transmission to be on at all. We're going to leave bit color and reflection on for the time being because we're going to look at how those impact the object as we go. But what I want to do is I want the color to be let's say it's like a beeswaxy kind of candle. So it's going to be like a creamy, like a warm, like white, or like a kind of creamy white color. So I'm going to go to a yellow that's a little bit more, a touch more orange than yellow, or than green. And I'm going to go pretty close to white, right? It's going to be right around there. You can kind of see it down here in the preview. That actually looks about like a candle color. So we're going to go ahead and set that. And then it's time to talk about subsurface, right? And by default, subsurface is hidden. And now we have several different options here. We have our color, we have our weight, right? We have our radius. So I'm going to go ahead and boost up my weight to 100%, right? I want the subsurface to be active. Now, when I do that, you're not going to notice any change whatsoever in my viewport. Right, this isn't something that OpenGL or Metal or whatever is being used to render this in real time. It doesn't pay attention to any of this. So then there's these other settings. So what does radius do? What does scale do? Etc. So let's go ahead and get our Redshift render view on and see what happens just with the default settings. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this. And already you should notice a pretty substantial difference. So one of the things that subsurface scattering allows you to do is to have backlighting, right, transmit through an object in a way that isn't transmission related. Now, I want you to also note that this takes substantially longer to render, right? It is not a quick or fast process. And so to speed this up a bit, for the time being, I'm going to hide I'm going to hide all the wine glasses. I'm just going to click here, and I'm just going to get rid of all the wine glasses. This should speed things up substantially because, right, I'm not rendering those transparent objects as well. And so you can already see, right, this light is shining through here. It's illuminating the candle, and that illumination fades as we get further from the light. That's a mix of the intensity of the light and the subsurface scattering scale that's listed on the object. So this is slowly coming into resolution. There's a couple things I would like to change before we go too much further. And the first one is that point light, right? It's way too cool. If I click on my point light and I go down to my object, go down to the color, it's just straight white, right? But this is a candle. Candle light, if we look at color temperature charts, and yes, I've been looking at MIDI stuff, so it says a candle flame or sunrise or sunset is 1850 degrees Kelvin. So let's go ahead and make that change. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to change my color mode on my light to temperature, and I'm going to change that from 6500 to 1850. And you're going to see a pretty remarkable difference in the lighting quality. It looks terrible in here, right? But this very, very warm light is now making this look quite a lot more like a candle, right? It doesn't look like some cool LED. It's not like they put like a white LED in a fake candle. It actually has warmth to it. So we've got that set. So what else do we need to look at and change and adjust? So what we really need to talk about, the setting that I want to talk about the most is radius. And I'm going to let this thing render a bit in the background while we do this, probably. I'm going to try not to, and we should maybe rename this candle, just so we know which one it is, because I've got enough in my scene now that I'm starting to not know what's what. So we've got this set. Let's go down to our subsurface, which for whatever reason closes every time. So we have two settings here. We have our color and we have our radius. Notice that the radius is also a color. Now you would think like, well, a radius should be a floating point number, right? It should be something, you know, between 0 and whatever big scale you want it to be. However, the way that radius works and the way that and the reason it works on color, as a color, is because what it's allowing you to do is it's allowing you to use a color value to set how far the red, green, and blue values of white light will transmit through this object, right? So if it's white, that's like as far as possible. And so we're going to just say, let's say we leave it at white. Then what that means is that this scale allows us to, then we could continue to crank it. We could be like, oh, I really want these rays to go further, but I'm all the way maxed out at as bright white as I can go. I'm going to go ahead and increase the scale at this point. Or maybe I want them all to be even, so I'm leaving it at white, but I'm going to decrease the scale to make the amount of transmission or the depth at which they transmit shallower. And so what this does is, so I can basically come in here and I could use my RGB sliders, and I could independently set like, oh, the blue wavelengths should stop really short. So I'm going to set that really close to 0, right? Which looks like, you know, more fully blue, or sorry, if I go to blue, right? If I set the blue really close to 0, because let's say they're going to be the shortest wavelengths, and let's go ahead and do that. We'll just drop that down. And I know that, say, the green is also going to be, you know, maybe they're going to transmit through a little bit further, but really the red light, the warm tones are what are going to be going through the most. So maybe I'll set this like this. And this is something where you can just kind of continue to experiment and test. I do want you to note that as it comes in, you can see those rays, right? You can see there's blue up here, there's little dots of blue as it's filling in, but there's no dots of blue down here. And there's a lot of red down here, and the green is like slowly coming in, but it's coming in over time, like at a gradient. So you can actually, as you watch this render in the progressive mode, you can see the way these different colors are being distributed as they get filled in. So something else I want you to note as this is filling in, and you may have noticed this while it was rendering before, but right, there's areas here where I'm getting more light through than at this top edge, right? And that's because from the candle flame to the camera, there's a lot more material right through this thick part here than there is in the surface here. So I'm actually getting more light in this thinner area. Right? It's a pretty amazing and super cool setting. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with those settings. Now I can also use color to tint the entire object or the light that's coming through. We're not going to look at that. I'm not going to actually adjust that setting right now because the radius is going to be doing that, a little bit of the color of the material. I could, generally the only thing I might do is right click over here, copy the color from the base and paste the color in here, but I actually want this to finish rendering in some sort of time. So I'm going to wait on that. But that might be a step that you would like to do. So it's like at least the same color. And usually, right, you can make it warmer, you can make it cooler. There's a lot of things you could do to it. You can have texture in here that isn't on the color channel. But to start with, this is what we're going to leave it set at so that it has some time to work. There are different modes that you can use. Random walk works pretty well. It's pretty efficient. I honestly haven't noticed a huge change when I've gone between different ones. And anisotropy, again, right, this just modifies kind of a bit about how the light bends through this material. Leaving it at 0 for a candle is pretty good. If you go to the help menu, right, again, right, we can't get there straight away because it's not linked correctly yet. But if we go to the Redshift renderer and then go down to shaders, and then once this loads, if we go to material shaders, right, and then go to standard material and go to subsurface, then we could hop from there. We could hop down to, we could look at the, where is it? Subsurface, here we go. We could look down through some of these settings and figure out what's the best. Obviously, all this is still loading because the internet down here has been achingly slow recently. Yeah, so you can look through there, you can find that. I'm not going to go ahead and go into there too deeply, but it will show you a lot of information. And so you can see, right, this is continuing to render. And light will transmit through here, and it will illuminate other objects in the scene. Right now, our candle is still pretty dim, and so I may go ahead and increase the intensity there of the light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase that intensity. I'm going to copy and paste this color so it's at least the same color, and then I am going to just sit here and wait for it to happen and skip ahead in the tutorial or speed this section up. So yeah, so I'm going to go to my light, and I'm going to maybe make this intensity even a little bit more powerful. I've got it at like 55,000, 2.5. And while I do this, I'm also going to go ahead and maybe lift this light up just a touch more. There we go, just a tiny bit. All right, so it's just popping over that edge just a little. And maybe at this point, I'll actually drop this down to like 40,000. And okay, so I'm going to turn my wine glasses back on, reframe this, and let this thing render. Okay, so presto, right? 10 minutes and 34 seconds later, I have rendered the scene, and it's really noisy. And so this is something that you need to note, especially with subsurface scattering. It's really expensive, and it takes time for these things to function, right? And you can see my path length is probably too long because I can see through this candle all the way down to the bottom, right? That's that scale of 1. I should probably trim that off, and we might do that and see if we can get a faster result from this. But the other thing I want to mention is I want you to see, like, there's a lot of noise in here, there's a lot of noise in the shadow, and there's noise in some of the, not so much in the reflective part of the glass, the surface, but some of the transmission part, there's a little bit of noise in there too. And it's hard to say, honestly, I'm going to zoom in just a touch here, but it's hard to say if some of that noise is, it looks like some of the noise is in the glass itself, and some of it is just the noise from the background that's being amplified by the reflectiveness of this glass. And so the solution to reducing this noise, granted it makes it take even longer to render, but the solution the solution to reducing this noise is in our materials when we have our different, if I was to double click on this candle material, right? Every time there's a section where there are samples, right? Where I have 16 samples here. If I go to transmission, you'll see my samples are set to 16 here as well. And actually my samples up top here are set to 8. And then if I look at subsurface, right, my samples are set to 64 by default, right? And so even at 64, I'm getting a lot of noise in there. And so I might need, if I want to keep this scene exactly as it is, but I want it to be a lot cleaner, I'm going to need to boost the number of samples in all of these values. And one of the things is lower light tends to result in more noise. Shadows tend to be noisier than well-lit areas because there's a lot more complexity in terms of the light that happens as a shadow, especially transitions from 100% opaque to no shadow whatsoever. You have to have a much finer grain light, basically finer grain detail there in order to get a smooth transition. And the same goes for something on the surface of an object with subsurface scattering happening. Now, one of the other things that we aren't really looking at here, and this example isn't showing, is this is the only light source in the scene, right? And so really we're seeing this one surface here that's being front lit, right? The light is hitting this surface and it's bouncing directly into the camera. Whereas everywhere else, the light is this light here is being transmitted through the candle wall towards the camera. Okay, welcome back. You may notice that the wine glasses have disappeared, and I stopped rendering this. A couple days has passed since I actually was able to get back to this, so here we go. So we've got our candle material, and everything's working pretty much as it should. Now, there's a couple things we haven't really gone through yet, and one of those is how this color and weight blends with the base color. And so that's something that we need to look at. And really, right, I think I talked about this before, but the base color, the reflection, right, and even transmission, those are all really calculated by light that's hitting the camera-facing surfaces of the object, whereas subsurface is calculated by light transmitting through from behind, right? It's basically, right, in this candle, right, there is this foreground light that's illuminating this surface, but it's also bouncing back through towards the camera, and that's what we're really seeing with subsurface scattering. And as I said, right, it takes a lot longer for subsurface scattering to render than just a solid, you're picking the color up from the front surface and sending it to the camera. All right, it's a lot more work for the computer to do this. So let's go ahead and see how these two things interact. Notice I've gotten rid of the wine glasses, and that's just to speed up time here. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to make this green because that's where my slider happens to be right now. And so I'm going to make the color completely green. And I want you to notice that there is basically no change whatsoever in the appearance of this object, right? If I was to let this continue to render, which I'm just going to let it go, I mean, we're only at 4%, but basically it's going to look exactly the same, right? And that's because I forgot to readjust my weight. So let's crank the weight up to 100% and let's see if we get a difference. Okay, so still no discernible difference, right? So how do I get this blend? In the past, it was always some sort of calculation between subsurface and the base color based on what light was hitting it. But we have a bit more control in Redshift. And so what we can do is we can actually, if we drop the weight of the subsurface down, let's just go to 50% to start with, or somewhere around there. You're going to see that more green is going to be coming through this surface. Now, the other thing that's happening here, right, is the only light source in our scene that I currently have turned on is the candle. So what I want to do is I want to go down and I want to turn on this other light over here that I've got. That's just the point source. I could do the softbox as well. Maybe I'll do the softbox. Let's go ahead and turn the softbox on. And I want you to see what happens now. So what has been the big change? Suddenly there's green, right? And that's because, as I said, right, the base color and the reflection is based on, right, glass is based on a light ray hitting the front surface and bouncing back to the camera. In our previous scene, when we had no other light sources, there was no light bouncing off of this, or it was so little that we wouldn't really see much green on there at all, right? So now that we've got the light on, we can see this surface, right? Because it needs light for that foreground color to be there. And so you can kind of see that, you know, as it goes, we get this nice blend from subsurface scattering to front surface as the subsurface scattering intensity decreases. And I want you to note that the weight doesn't change the distribution or the path lengths or anything like that. It just basically allows the foreground to come through a little bit. And so we can use this to get really, you know, subtle results. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can drop this down to something really small and we'll see, right? I want you to note specifically around the edges here, and you'll probably see as it fills in, there's some areas that are going to be lighter because light's coming through there, right? But we still have predominantly a hard flat surface. Now, the other thing that we need, that the other setting, right, that we can adjust is, right, the scale. So let's go ahead and put this weight back somewhere around the middle. And then let's just drop our scale down even further and see what we get here, right? And so with the scale shorter, I want you to note that we also get a similar result, right? We have the light rays are not going to be able to transmit through as much of this material. And so it basically means more of this is going to be available for the foreground color or the base color to fill in. Okay, so we've got this light, we've got this scene, right? And if we want to, the other things, there's some other changes we can make. It depends on your material, right? Obviously, like we have our radius pretty high. If we were to drop the vibrance of our radiance down, we can have similar transmission properties, right? We're keeping, the color is the same, it's just getting darker, which would mean that we would have less and less. So if I drop this down to like 50% here, right, you're going to see that we barely have any light transmitting through because we've made the path lengths before the light is absorbed completely shorter. So it has to be thinner material. Now, we're not getting too much We get a little transmission up here, but right, we're not getting any transmission really in the body. Now, something I do want you to note is there is light, right, bouncing off the floor. It's also bouncing off this back surface from our overhead light. And so you can see we get a little bit more light and a little bit more of that yellow color coming through the sides, right? That's because when it's tangential, we have just a tiny bit and we can actually see that material coming. Now, if I stayed here for however long, however many minutes it's going to take me to render this thing, eventually this would be a smooth surface and it would be polished, right? Because we have our roughness set, reasonably low. And so we'd actually have a lot more surface on here. So I'm going to go ahead and let this run, and then we will accelerate the tutorial, and you can kind of see the final output. Okay, so this is at about 60%. And you can see that already, right, we're getting those shorter path lengths, right? As soon as the material gets thicker here, where there's no longer this cut in, it starts to get much darker. And we get this nice solid surface. And you can kind of see how, given enough time, it's smoother, right? It looks a lot less noisy. And eventually it will be a really high quality image. So this is subsurface scattering. There is a bunch more you can do with it. Anytime you're making anything that's plastic, unless it is very darkly dyed black plastic, you should imagine that light does move through it, right? Everything else, we look at it, it's not going to look quite right unless you have at least a little bit of path length. And right, if it's a more opaque plastic, you can set the radius to, a substantially darker number. You could leave it higher, but you could set your scale really low. And you could even reduce the weight of this as well so that more front surface material comes through. But that's just something to keep in mind, is that, right, you want this to be going in and bouncing through there just a little bit to make those plastics feel believable. probably just stop.